one verse out of the Quran, the Muslim's Bible, that I forgot to mention. And this is every woman's favorite verse out of the Quran. And in Surah 434, this is dealing with women and what the Quran says about women. It says, men are the protectors and maintainers of women because God hath... Is that kind of loud? Is that loud? Too loud? Because God has given the men, more strength than the other one, and because they support them from their means. Therefore, the righteous women are devoutly obedient and guard in the husband's absence what God would have them guard. As to the women on whose part ye fear disloyalty and ill conduct, admonish them first, next, refuse to share their beds, and last, beat them lightly. But if they return to obedience, seek not against them means of annoyance. So yeah, I was always going to, isn't that nice? Yeah, the Quran actually tells the men. Now, it doesn't say that you find proof and they're actually guilty. It only says, as to the women on whose part you fear disloyalty. So you don't even have to have proof as a Muslim husband, just have suspicion. And fear disloyalty or ill conduct, first you admonish them. Secondly, you refuse to share their beds. And thirdly, you beat them lightly, of course, it says. And of course, lightly is up to the discretion of the husband. So yes, also, the Muslims are allowed to have up to 4 wives. So isn't that nice? I knew it. And so yes, you can beat your wife, all 4 of them, if you want to. All right, new topic this morning. Those were verses I forgot last time I was teaching. This morning we're going to deal with creation science, or creation versus evolution, or creationism. And everybody tries to make you think that evolution is scientifically provable, scientifically fact. They always, if you read textbooks from colleges, I've read quite a few of them, biology books or science books, they always talk about the fact of evolution. And so there's a certain type of science called empirical science. Evolution is non-scientific. When you say that, people say, what? My textbook says it's a fact. Well, it's not a fact. It's just a theory, a bad theory at that. Scientific, for something to be scientific or empirically scientific, it must be repeatable. You must be able to do it over and over and over and over and create the same scenario over and over. It must be testable. You must be able to test what you're repeating over and over and over, test it somehow. And it must be demonstratable. So for something to be empirically scientific or a fact, it must have those 3 qualities. It must be repeatable, able to be repeated. For example, we can demonstrate gravity. You throw your Bible up in the air or anything up in the air or just drop anything, it goes down. It never does go up unless it's helium or lighter than the air, of course. But then it will come down eventually. So it must be testable, so you can test gravity over and over and over. You can demonstrate gravity over and over and over. So evolution, or the origin of the universe, it only happened one time. You cannot repeat it. You cannot repeat or duplicate or test the origin of this universe. It only happened one time. It's not occurring again. Origins don't keep repeating, or else they're not origins. You have something that originates or starts. You have a starting place. Well, you don't just keep starting, because it starts and then proceeds from there. So you cannot repeat evolution, or let's say the Big Bang. You can't test the Big Bang, and you cannot demonstrate the Big Bang. So right there, it falls from the category of scientific fact or empirically scientific. There's another type of science that we deal with, origins, or non-reoccurring facts, and that's called forensic science. There's a big buzz. I think you can read in the news and stuff. There's forensics. Everybody's into forensics these days, and trying to trace evidence and piece this evidence here and that evidence there, and trying to find out what took place, what first, second, and third. I remember the O.J. Simpson trial a few years back. They had all this forensic evidence. They had bloody footprints. They had a bloody glove in his house, and they had all this. They had a dead woman, and so you piece all these pieces of evidence together. What happened first, second, third, and fourth? Because if you see bloody footprints running from a pool of blood and a dead body, they didn't run towards the dead body with blood on their feet, especially if the blood's the same blood from the dead body. You have forensic science that deals with non-reoccurring events that happened. They're not reoccurring every time. You cannot test them, prove them, or demonstrate them. You just got to try to figure out what took place first, second, and third. That's the type of science that you deal with origins on, is forensic science. Well, we have a universe. We can prove we have a universe. We exist, but we don't know how it started. We cannot repeat the creation of this universe. We have the results of the creation of the universe. We have fossil records, and fossil records shows there's millions of dead things all across the world. And these things died, and they were fossilized. Nobody alive today saw them die, but we know they exist because we can go prove them, we can dig them up, we can test them, we can reconstruct them, put the skeletons together, and we know that these fossils exist. Now, how they got there, we can't prove empirically, but we can test and go back forensic science and try to find evidence of how they occurred. It's always good to consult somebody who was there. And we have a being in this universe who claims he was around when the universe was created. His name is God. He claims that he was there, he created it, and he told us in the books a little bit about how he did it. And so we have a book, and we have an eyewitness who claims to be there, and his name is God. And he's told us a little bit about it. Now, there are two types of evolution. When people say, I believe in evolution or I don't believe in evolution, you have to qualify what evolution you're talking about. There's a term called microevolution and a term called macroevolution. Microevolution is evolution within the species, phylum, category, or kingdom. In other words, everybody here used to be 1 year old. You used to be inside your mother's womb. Now we're of age. Everybody here is at least 20 years of age. And so we have grown, but we haven't changed. We haven't become a monkey or an amoeba. We haven't become a fossilized dinosaur. We haven't become a car or a truck, or we haven't become a chimpanzee. We're still a human being. That's called microevolution. Evolution or adaptation or change within the kingdom, phylum, category, or species. We're still human beings. And I'm glad throughout the history of mankind, every human being that's ever been born of woman always came out of the womb as a human being. Isn't that amazing? It never came out as a crocodile or an alligator or an elephant or a giraffe. And humans give birth to humans. And so, macroevolution is evolution from one species to another species, a big jump. They talk about quantum leaps and all this kind of garbage. There's been no evidence of that whatsoever. There's no fossilized records of it. There's no body observing a human being given birth to anything other than a human being. And so their macroevolution is where you get your evolution of the God haters out there. And so there's no evidence of that, no proof of it, just an assumption, just a theory. I want to say this also. Any questions or comments or things pop in your head, just say them. I know it's dangerous when I... Well, thank you. I know I'm giving somebody the floor to say anything he wants to. Amen. So, when Charles Darwin wrote his book and his postulated, tried to scientificize the theory of evolution, the origin of species and of preferred races. You know, they always give you the whole title of his book. It's called The Origin of Species of Preferred Races. Charles Darwin was a racist supreme. He believed that in the survival of the fittest and what has survived is the best. And so he believed they were preferred races. If you just Google that if you want to, his title, you'll see right there his original title. He was along with Margaret Sanger. Later on came after that. And so, but Darwin postulated his theory of evolution. And you might even say that Darwin was, just give him the benefit of the doubt. Let's say this, he was trying to be honest, which we've learned about his life that he wasn't. But he was ignorant of the DNA molecule. Charles Darwin had no concept of DNA molecules. And everybody since then, since the creation of the electron microscope, there was no electron microscopes around with Charles Darwin. And now we know there's DNA. The DNA is a double helix of different chemicals and sequences that everybody has it, every living being has it, every living substance has it, every living plant or animal has it, and it's what makes up that living entity. And so Darwin had no clue that there was a DNA molecule or a single cell or whatever, and he was clueless as to what the basic formula for life was. He was, you could actually say, well, okay, in the 1800s, let's say he was free to assume what he said scientifically since he had no clue of a DNA molecule. But since we have DNA, we know that if you don't have the right structures of DNA, you have non-life. You don't get anything. The pew there, the wood has a DNA to it, has a molecular structure, I should say, and that molecular structure is not the same as a human being. And so we know that everything has particles and a molecular structure to it. There's a subatomic world out there that we can't see unless we have an electron microscope. And they have traced the entire human genetic genome, all of our genes and all of our genetic code material, and they've traced it. They know that it's how they can basically do all the scientific medical surgeries, what they can do, and the drugs and the chemicals and the antidotes for viruses and so on, because they've traced all this stuff. They know all this stuff exists. There was a man named Miller in the 1950s. He did an experiment, and he was lauded for many years in the classrooms and science books as the person who proved evolution was true. And Miller did an experiment, and he created an amino acid. But they don't tell you the whole story. They just say, okay, he created an amino acid. Well, how did he create this amino acid? You know, evolution says we all came from chance and nothing and randomness, and this something came from nothing. Well, we know that everything came from something, which was God. You can't get something from nothing. You get something from something. But Miller said, created an amino acid in a laboratory. So here we have a laboratory setting of all this knowledge and intelligence of his laboratory, and he created some some chemicals like hydrogen and helium and oxygen or whatever he used. And he started taking this and he started experimenting with that. That didn't work, so I'll trade this chemical with that chemical. That didn't work, so I'll keep trading it. And he put a lightning bolt or a spark, he put energy into it, electricity, which would simulate a lightning bolt. But that assumes that there was a lightning bolt somewhere. And so, but he created this amino acid by putting electricity into this chemical mixture he had inside this test tube or this incubator or whatever, and he created an amino acid. Well, he and the God haters out there said, that's how it started. Well, what he disproved is it takes intelligence to create an amino acid. It took his intelligence, number one. It took existing chemicals, number two. It took energy, electricity, number three. And so it took all these things. So that still does not explain where these other things came from. Where did the electricity come from? Where did the chemicals come from? Where did his brain come from? Who created that? So actually what he set out to prove, as so many atheists have done, they set out to prove God doesn't exist, and God in his wisdom shows their foolishness, and they prove that he does exist, or they actually prove their theories are false. So, Miller's experiment was lauded from the 1950s up until, when I started preaching on campuses in the mid-'80s, he was still being taught in the textbooks. They don't teach them that much anymore. They will allude to it, but they realize now if the information everybody has at their fingertips with the internet and computers, that they can't push that over anymore as saying that's proof for evolution. Because they realize it's proof for creation or divine intelligence or intelligent design. It takes intelligence. Because Miller sure didn't create an amino acid without his intelligence. What evolutionists want you to believe is that a 350 Chevrolet motor can come into existence by itself. They want you to believe that you just give enough matter. Matter is material or substance or dirt or metal or whatever. You just give it enough time and it'll become a 350 Chevrolet and you can put it in your car and run it. But I'll even go this further, this much further. I'll give you a 350 Chevy block. I'll give you a crank bearings, cam bearings. I'll give you an intake. I'll give you pistons, piston rings, piston rods. All the intelligence it is to create such a thing. To create a piston doesn't just happen by itself. It takes great intelligence to create a piston. I'll give you a carburetor. I'll give you a starter. I'll give you an intake manifold, exhaust manifold. I'll give you the distributor. I'll give you all this electrical circuit and wiring, the spark plugs, the spark plug wires. We all just put it right in a room. Pieces. Feel like we're at David's shop. No. Just sit there in pieces. And it'll never become a 350 Chevrolet motor that works. Have you ever had one come together by itself? It takes intelligence to put them together. They say apply energy to it, shake it up a little bit, put some spark to it. Okay, what happens to a crankshaft journal the first time you shake it up and it comes in contact with another piece of metal? You'll scar that crankshaft journal up and you won't be able to use it. So no, 350 Chevrolet motors just don't come into existence by themselves. They don't happen. It takes intelligence and intelligent design to put them together. All right, there is a formula for life. We're actually going to use the Bible today. In Genesis chapter 2, verse 7. And we know there's a formula for life now. Charles Darwin did not know it since he did not know about DNA molecule. There's 4 essential ingredients for life, and God told us all the way back in Genesis chapter 2, verse 7, what it takes to have life. Genesis 2:7 says, "And the Lord God formed man of the dust of the ground, and breathed into his nostrils the breath of life, and man became a living soul." Right here is a scientific verse. It doesn't talk in scientific terms like a scientist would, but right there, God broke it down easy enough for us to understand it. And the Lord God, number one, it takes four things: time, energy, matter, and a big word named teleonomy, or just basic intelligence. It takes time, energy, matter, and intelligence to have life. And here we find in verse 7, and the Lord God, there's your intelligence, formed man of the dust of the ground. The dust of the ground is your matter, your substance, your dirt. And breathed into his nostrils the breath of life. There's your energy, God's breath. God breathed into him. There's the energy of life right there, the breath of life. And man became a living soul. There's your time. Poof, a nanosecond or less. There's your life right there. Genesis 2:7 is a scientific verse. It tells you all four ingredients right there for life. And God told us all the way back in the garden how he created life. And it took man 6,000 years or so to find out how life started. And some still don't like to admit it. Evolutionists try to say that life started by the Big Bang. And the Big Bang is this theory where everything that was in the universe that existed, which, number one, they don't explain how the universe existed or whatever was out there existed. They just say whatever was out there was sucked in and pulled into a vacuum. They don't explain where the vacuum came from. And this vacuum pulled it all tight. It's a little tiny ball and a dot and such some small particle that it contains so much energy that it just blew apart. A Big Bang. Well, anybody believe that? No. So, they don't explain how all that could have happened in the first place. So, and they also say the Big Bang, when the vacuum was pulling it tight, it was spiraling and started spinning so much and spinning so small. If you ever read about atoms, they're spinning. Our atomic structure, every atom is spinning. It's got proton, neutron, and a nucleus. And it's spinning right now inside of our bodies. There's subatomic things that are spinning fast and working. And if you've seen some of these things, you can go see some of these on the internet, and they have pistons and crankshafts and motors and propellers, and it's amazing. And we thought that we made a propeller first, but no, God made it, and it's in our actual bodies right now. But the Big Bang, it was spinning so fast, it just blew apart. Anybody ever played on a merry-go-round? I know we older folks have, because they've outlawed them now. Isn't that sad? They've outlawed merry-go-rounds because they're too dangerous. And so, but in a merry-go-round, when you spun that merry-go-round so much, so fast, whoever fell off of one? I did. Which way did you fall off? The way it was spinning or the way it was not spinning? Yeah, the way it was spinning. You flew off, if it's going this way, you're going to fly off that way. You didn't fly off that way. That'd be against laws of physics that we have in the world. Well, if the Big Bang happened like it did and everything spun off from one center point and spun out into the world and the universe, everything would be spinning the same way. But in our own universe, we have planets that spin counterclockwise and some that spin counterclockwise. We have moons that spin clockwise and counterclockwise. God just did that just for fun. And, just to show man he doesn't know what he's talking about. I found that God's, he just did it that way, just to, for his humor. His foolishness is wiser than the wisdom of men, the Bible says. So, right there, just the rotation of the planets, you can't get that from the Big Bang. And so, in the book of Genesis, we find that death, there's, I'll get into that. Yeah, there's a teaching out there called theistic evolution, or they believe in God, but God used evolutionary means, scientific evolutionary means, to create man. That's called theistic evolution. That's your middle of the roaders. They believe in God, but they want to believe in evolution, so they don't have all these pointy intellectuals in ivory towers at universities think they're cavemen living in the dark ages who don't believe in science. So we'll hold a little bit of science and a little bit of Bible here. We'll say that God created everything by creation means. Well, there's a problem. Also, I'm not a believer in the gap theory. I don't hear it preached too much anymore. The gap theory claims that in Genesis chapter 1 and 2, there's a gap. Genesis chapter 1, verse 1, it says, "In the beginning, God created the heaven and the earth. And the earth was without form and void, and darkness was upon the face of the deep, and the Spirit of God moved upon the face of the waters. And God said, 'Let there be light,' and there was light." How many of you read right there? How many of you heard me read that there was millions of years between God's creation and when he started from God and the creation of the heavens and the earth? Didn't you hear me read about millions of years and a pre-Adamic race and all kinds of human beings and animals and dinosaurs, and they're all killing each other and they all died off? Well, I just read it to you. Well, no, I didn't, did I? I didn't read that big mess in there. Now, of course, if you want to believe that, that's your problem. But it'd be hard to prove that to anybody. You know, a good test is try to find somebody who doesn't know anything about the Bible or hasn't read Dake's Mistakes or the gap theory and hasn't been taught the gap theory. And then read it to them and say, what do you hear by the first plain reading of the Bible? Some things people believe because they were taught it, not because they read it from the Bible. So we find in Romans chapter 5, verse 12, one of the biggest verses against the gap theory is, "Wherefore, as by one man sin entered into the world, and death by sin, and so death passed upon all men, for that all have sinned." We find that by one man, Adam, sin entered into the world, and death by sin. There was no physical death before Adam's sin. And so if there was no physical death before Adam's sin, how could there have been a pre-Adamic race that existed and died off, and a bunch of animals died off, and dinosaurs? I mean, if there was no death before Adam, there was no death before Adam. So, did I hit any questions there? And so, we have the theistic evolution. They want to try to claim that creation happened over millions of years when they try to claim the Bible. Now, I was invited one year at Berea College in Berea, Kentucky, by a professor. Forget what class it was that he was teaching. I was preaching on campus there, and this professor invited me into his classroom. And they were teaching that week or that semester or that part of the course that semester on the Scopes monkey trial that happened in Dayton, Tennessee. And that's where they had this creation evolution debate back in the early 1900s, and it was really dramatized and heard around the country with what news media there was. It was the biggest news thing going on at the time. But the Christian guy made the mistake of trying to claim creation started by evolutionary means. Well, he messed up because they ate his lunch. Because the Bible tells us what a day is. The Hebrew word for day is yom, Y-O-M. And the Hebrew word yom is always interpreted or defined by its context, by what's before and after it. So, in Genesis chapter 1, verse 5, it says, "And God called the light day, and the darkness he called night. And the evening and the morning were the first day. So here in the context, we have the word day. God tells us the first day is defined by one evening and one morning. So the evening and morning is the first day. So the first day was a one evening and one morning, not 2 evenings, not 2 mornings, but one evening and one morning. Do we still have evenings and mornings today? We do. How long does it take? 24 hours. Basically, because our Earth is basically around 24,000 square miles circumference, and it takes one day for it to go around and rotate one time, and that's how we get our days, evenings and mornings. And so therefore, it lets you know it's spinning about 1,000 miles an hour. Gravity's wonderful, isn't it? I'm thankful for it. So here we have the day referred to as an evening and a morning, one solar 24-hour time period day. In verse 8, we find that God called the firmament heaven, and the evening and the morning were the second day. So here we have the second day defined in the context of one evening and one morning. So here we have 2 days. God specifically put that in there in the Bible to let you know the second day was the same as the first day, one evening, one morning. Verse 13, and the evening and the morning were the third day. So here, God's taking pains again to let us know the third day was the same as the first and second day, one evening, one morning. So here we have 3 24-hour solar time period days. Verse 19, and the evening and the morning were the fourth day. So here again, God lets us know the fourth day was just like the first 3 days, one evening, one morning. Verse 23, and the evening and the morning were the fifth day. So here we have 5 days, they're all the same. Verse 31, and God saw everything that he had made, and behold, it was very good, and the evening and the morning were the sixth day. So here on the sixth day was the end of his creation, and the sixth day was just like the first 5 days, consisting of an evening and a morning. So here we have 6 literal solar time period days consisting of evenings and mornings. God told us he did it in 6 literal days. And so you cannot get theistic evolution from Genesis. You have to create and add to and construct a wild theory. And the best way they tried to figure it out was called the gap theory, and they put it right there in Genesis chapter 1, verses 1 and 2. Because, Genesis does not allow for a pre-Adamic race, so they had to insert it somewhere. So they they picked the best place they thought and put it in there. Now, we find fossils. There is a fossil record out there. So everybody says, the fossils prove evolution. Well, no, the fossils prove there's millions of dead things all around the earth. That's all it proves. That's all it shows. We don't know how they got there, or when they got there, or what. But we do have somebody who claims he was there. His name's God, and he told us about a flood, and a worldwide flood, not just a regional flood or a partial flood, but a worldwide flood. And fossils, all you deer hunters out here, if you go out there and kill a deer and you don't find it, but then you come back, a week or two later or so, or let's say you come back the next year and you find the carcass. Well, what happened to it? Coyotes ate it, vultures ate it, turkey buzzards ate it. It became a predator's dream and a meal for somebody or something. And so it didn't become a fossil. Why? Because if you just leave something dead by itself, it'll be disturbed by predators. And the carcass will get destroyed and it'll get eaten up. But we have perfectly, wholly preserved, fossilized dinosaurs and mammoths. Some of the mammoths they've uncovered in Siberia from the ice still has green vegetation in their mouth and their stomachs. Now that had to be called a snap freeze. Bird's Eye and frozen food companies know how to snap freeze certain products, and so it had to be a very fast snap. How cold it'd have to be to snap freeze a mammoth. I mean, that's a lot of meat and a lot of innards. So they can snap freeze vegetables and preservation, but to snap freeze a mammoth, you gotta have some pretty serious cold. And especially to preserve the greenery that he was eating in his mouth and his stomach. I mean, they've even eaten off of some of these mammoths' skin. They've uncovered it, and it's still fresh enough to eat. And so you have to have a big, cold environment. And the flood of Noah, we read the book of Genesis, God destroyed this earth in the sense he destroyed the physical aspects of this earth. And we know that God changed the physiology of humans. We were created to live forever. If we would have eaten from the tree of life, we would never have died. So we went from being able to live forever to now we die and deteriorate and get diseases and get sickness, and we end up in the grave and become dust as we were. So that's changed. We also know about the garden. It brought forth its own produce, its own vegetation for man to eat. And it was self-sustaining. Now we have to work at the sweat of our brow and sustain our own food. And so God changed that part of the physical laws of nature. We also know that there was no rain before the flood. Genesis chapter 2, verse 6. But there went up a mist from the earth and watered the whole face of the ground. And so there was a mist that came up and watered the earth. And that's why there's another verse that says there was no rain before the flood of Noah. And that's why they all laughed at Noah, because he's prophesying rain that nobody ever seen before. So we know that God changed the laws of nature, physical laws on this earth during the time of the flood, because the diet of man before the flood is Genesis 1, 29 and 30. And God said, Behold, I have given you every herb bearing seed, which is upon the face of all the earth, and every tree in the which is the fruit of a tree, yielding seed. To you it shall be for meat. And to every beast of the earth, and to every fowl of the air, and to everything that creepeth upon the earth, wherein there is life, I have given every green herb for meat, and it was so. Before the flood, we have evidence that we were not carnivores. We were not meat eaters. Nobody was a meat eater before the flood. We all ate green vegetation and herbs. And so, but after the flood, we find in Genesis chapter 9, since God changed our physiology, changed the earth and the physical laws some. He didn't change all the laws, of course. Genesis 9, verse 2, we find God says, And the fear of you and the dread of you shall be upon every beast of the earth, and upon every fowl of the air, upon all that moveth upon the earth, and upon all the fishes of the sea. Into your hand are they delivered. Every moving thing that liveth shall be meat for you, even as the green herb have I given you all things. So here, post-flood diet by God is we can now eat animals. We obviously had things were changed. We need more protein from what vegetation can give. We need to eat the meat. And so God said every living thing, even the things in the ocean, even pigs, even rabbits, even shellfish, lobsters, clams, everything we can eat. Shrimp. This was all God said, eat it. Now this is before the law of Moses that came hundreds of years later. But in the beginning, we were all herbalists and vegetarians. After the flood, God said, you can now eat meat. So there's obviously something changed. Also, we have decay. I may have to finish this next week as well. We have decay from deterioration. One of the greatest sources of of radiation. Radiation is what destroys life. One of the greatest sources of radiation known to mankind is called the sun. Before the flood, there was a water vapor canopy or water cloud or frozen water. It just says water up there. And it protected us and shielded us from the harmful radiation of the sun. And this was a tropical greenhouse. This was a perfect paradise, which is proof that you can, if your environment dictates what you do, which is not true, you're a product of your choices. If your environment creates your behavior, mankind had the perfect environment from the very beginning. And we still chose to rebel against God, which shows that sin's a matter of choice, not your environment. But we have this radiation from the sun. We had the first rainbow after the flood that ever existed that shows that the radiation from the sun is now getting through our atmosphere and poses as a rainbow. That never took place before the flood of Noah. And we have radiation, which creates genetic mutations and diseases and causes problems. And the greatest source of that is the sunshine, is the sun. Of course, we need sun. We now need it. I believe we get vitamin D from the sun, whereas before, they didn't have the sun like we do today. So there must have been something God changed in that aspect of our physical bodies where we now need to be out in the sun. So we don't know how the earth before the flood looked. We don't know how mankind was made up physically. We know he was, pretty well made to live forever. This earth was tropical and brought forth its own produce. And we're out of time. Questions, comments, rebukes? What chapter? Yeah. Correct. Yes, sir. You got that right. Right. And man, if, let's say he only was a day old, you don't get too hungry in a day old. And I'm sure if God can create you, he can sustain you for a day or two.